Okay, so I want to talk about utilitarianism and criminal justice. And in the issue of criminal justice, there's a lot going on. We could talk about enforcement. We could talk about, you know, how district attorneys go after criminals. Again, there's a lot going on. There's mainly what I want to focus on, though, is the question of punishment. Very, very central. You know, if we didn't punish criminals, we wouldn't have a criminal justice system. So I think that's kind of the fundamental question, even though there's a lot of other interesting stuff going on. And when we get to the question of punishment, there are two big questions, right? Why punish criminals at all? And how do we set punishments? Now, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about question one, and I'm mainly going to talk about why this is such a pressing and important and honestly kind of hard to answer question for the utilitarian. And it's a hard question to answer, why punish criminals? Or at least it seems a hard question to answer with anything besides, well, maybe we shouldn't, because punishment obviously has a lot of costs. Now, I don't think that's where the utilitarian is going to come down. They're not ultimately going to be abolitionists and say we just shouldn't punish criminals. But to see why this is a hard question, well, it takes a minute, but it is, right? And that's because punishment, by its very nature, causes pain and creates a lot of unhappiness or costs happiness. Well, why is that? Well, obviously, by definition, the punishment has to make the punished person unhappy. If it doesn't make you unhappy, it is not a punishment, right? You know, I remember in high school, not high school, I guess it was high school, and, we'd have these like pep rallies and, for our just abysmal football team. And I remember I got in trouble. I don't know what I did. And it's like, well, you can't go to the pep rally where we pretend that our incredibly bad football team is not going to get massacred and, watch some awkward cheerleading, right? You have to sit in this room and you can just do your homework. And I'm like, all right, so I can just sit here and do work that I won't have to do at home. And when I go home, I can play more video games. And if I finish early, I can just read. This is a geeky little kid, right? I can just read the Star Trek novel that's in my backpack. All right, this is great. I'm trying to figure out how to get in trouble every time before pep rally. So I mean, do this every time, right? This is marvelous. That was not a punishment for me because it did not cause me unhappiness, right? If it is a real punishment, it has to cause unhappiness. If it doesn't, you need to rethink the punishment, right? And that holds for children, that holds for your pets, that holds for whatever. That's just the nature of punishment, right? If criminal punishment doesn't make the criminal unhappy, if it doesn't make his life worse, if it doesn't deprive him of happiness, if not even cause outright pain, it's not a punishment. So by its very nature, punishment creates unhappiness for the person punished, right? But there's also the fact that punishment, especially incarceration, which is the main way we as a society have chosen to punish criminals, which is honestly kind of a weird choice, but it is our main way of punishing criminals. Incarceration has huge costs. And a lot of those costs are just money costs, right? I looked this up. You see wildly divergent figures. There's a very good, I did some research on this. It seems like a pretty well-regarded, pretty reliable site, USA Facts. And they say average spending per inmate in the US is about $64,000 a year. It varies a lot from state to state. Some states are below this, sometimes by a lot. Some states are above this by a lot, but this is the average. And interestingly, Virginia is pretty close to the average. I'm rounding off these numbers here, but Virginia a little bit below average, but about average, right? Well, why is this important? Well, you have to think of what else you could do with this money, right? If we're spending $64,000 a year to keep someone in prison, well, what else could we spend that money on in society? $61,000 a year is tuition for 2 or 3 people at most four-year colleges in this state, right? Or if you just want to focus on crime, $64,000 a year would more than pay in most places to hire another police officer, right? Even if you just focus on crime, even if that's what you're worried about, you could just hire more police, right? There's other stuff you could do with it. It's another elementary school teacher, right? It's a lot of money. And we could spend it on a lot of other things, and a lot of those other things would create a lot of happiness. Well, why and when is this a good use of money? And there are other costs of incarceration too. There is the prisoner's family, right? Family and wider community. Family takes the brunt of it, wider community is also affected. And look, if your father or mother or whoever is in prison, that is going to make you sad in and of itself, right? On top of that, you know, there's going to be an economic impact. If one of your parents is in prison, it's going to make you way worse off economically in and of itself. Wider community, this person's taken out of the community, well, that's going to have an impact. It spider webs outwards, like a broken windshield. All these other ways putting someone in jail is going to create unhappiness. And to be perfectly cold-blooded about it, society as a whole, right? It's not just that we're paying to put this person in prison. It's that when they're in prison, they can't hold down a normal job or contribute to society at all, right? Not just that you're paying for this, but a lot of these people, some might be career criminals, but a lot would maybe have 9 to 5 jobs, contributing to society, paying taxes. They obviously can't do that if they're in prison. So the costs of putting someone in prison are big. Might be a reason if you want to get really radical, we should think of other punishments. But any punishment by its very nature is going to have some costs, right? Well, how in the world could a utilitarian support punishment at all? Especially incarceration, punishment we've chosen as our society. It is a big question. It is a pressing one. I just want to make this clear to you guys why this question is hard. In the next lecture, I'll start talking about how the utilitarian would answer it.